your training. It's Hello and welcome to Meet the Creators. My name is Hattie Archibald. I'm an emerging director and graduate of the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, and today it's my particular honour to be speaking with four seriously fabulous female creators and fellow AFTRS alumni about a subject I'm very passionate about, and I know our panellists are too, the female frame. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm dialing in from today in St Peters, New South Wales, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend a special welcome to any First Nations people watching today. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the co-presenting partners with AFTRS for this event, ACMI, Film Victoria and Media Mentors Australia. We were actually meant to have this discussion as part of Vivid, which unfortunately couldn't take place this year. So I'm very grateful to our partners for bringing everyone together today in this forum. And what's terrific about this setup is that for those of you watching live on YouTube, if you have any questions for the panel, you can post them directly in the YouTube chat. And at the end, this conversation will continue to live online at this link. So before I introduce our wonderful panellists, Gillian Armstrong, Samantha Lang, Unjoo and Vanessa Gazy, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to outline why we're having this discussion today. This year, Chloe Zhao's Oscar and Jess Hobbs's recent Emmy are a testament to the fact that finally female screen directors are starting to receive the creative recognition they deserve. We've seen substantive shifts in the screen industry with greater representations of women on screen, with more female characters with greater agency, more female-centred stories, and more diverse, varied and authentic representations of women. We've also seen a greater representation of females in creative roles supported by initiatives like 50-50 by 2020 and Gender Matters and Free the Bid. But historically, we've seen a relative paucity of female representation and a relative abundance of problematic female representation. And the shifts that we're seeing have only recently taken place and are still relatively new. Chloe Zhao's Best Director Oscar made her only the second woman in history to win the award and the first woman of colour. And while Gender Matters has been very successful so far in exceeding its KPIs, we revealed last year that 56% of the projects that received Screen Australia production funding in the initial period had at least half of their key creative roles occupied by women. The number of female directors of feature films in 2018 and 2019 was still below parity at 27%, which, although it's better than the 16% average figure that we saw from 1970 to 2014, it's still less than ideal. This discussion is an opportunity to reflect on where we're up to and how we need to steer the conversation about the female frame moving forwards. And I'd like to note that while this discussion will focus specifically on gender and how the filmmaking community can continue to support female and female identifying filmmakers across the gender spectrum, it's important that we continue to have other conversations about diversity and privilege and otherwise work towards supporting the voices of marginalised and underrepresented communities in screen storytelling. So, without further ado, allow me to introduce our creators. And given the time constraints today, I'm not going to give a full bio for everyone here, but I urge you, if you're not already familiar with these incredible filmmakers and their works, go and treat yourself and watch or rewatch their beautiful films and works. So joining us today, we have Gillian Armstrong, who has received an AM for her services to the Australian film industry. Her 1979 debut film, My Brilliant Career, made her the first woman to direct a feature-length film in Australia in almost 50 years. And since then, she has been an absolute trailblazer, to say the least, both here and in Hollywood. Jill, I only had a message today from a leading Australian writer-producer who said you were the reason that she realised that women could tell screen stories. We're so privileged to have you. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you. Thanks. Pleasure.
I'm also thrilled to welcome Samantha Lang. Sam is an incredible filmmaker and visual artist who has worked in Australia, France, and the US over the last 20 years. In addition to her extraordinary body of work as a creative practitioner, Sam has also been a serious mover and shaker in other roles in the industry, including for a time as president of the Australian Directors Guild. It's a
long time.
I'm still the president. I finished this year after 6 years. So,
oh, wonderful. I'd also like to welcome Unjoo, who's joining us today from LA, where there has been just some hot off the press news that Unjoo has just signed on to direct the Ally Entertainment adaptation of the book Frankly in Love, which is very exciting. And this is off the back of her stunning feature film, I Am Woman, based on the life of singer-songwriter Helen Reddy. Thanks for joining us, Unjoo. We're thrilled to have you.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
And finally, also joining us from LA is creator, writer, director Vanessa Gazy. Vanessa is the creator behind the 8-part mystery drama series Eden that premiered earlier this year on Stan. And the reason why she's in LA at the moment is she's currently filming her next series, an 8-part mystery thriller for Netflix called Echoes. So Vanessa, thanks for carving some time out for us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. So to kick us off, one of the questions we'd like to address in this discussion is this question, first of all, of whether female directors bring different or unique perspectives to filmmaking. And I'd love to hear about your experiences and what happens when we put women in positions of leadership in screen storytelling. I wonder, Sam, would you like to kick us off with this?
Look, I think it's so interesting. When I read again today that question, I was thinking about how what's important is that we have multiple perspectives as filmmakers, that, you know, we need female perspectives, we need disabled perspectives, we need queer perspectives, we need to kind of break down the auteur myth, which is the kind of white male genius, and that women are part of that shift in kind of opening up the lens to different stories. Having said that, and I think it would be dangerous to consider female as a sort of essentialist female gaze, because we are all women here, but we all have very different voices. Having said that, I think that, you know, films like Gillian's My Brilliant Career or early Jane Campion films definitely influenced me as a female filmmaker. And I remember when I made my first film, the question asked me many times was, what is this film even about? It's just got these two women in it. And at the time, I didn't really understand that. Looking back, I think, oh, because there wasn't a kind of male protagonist, it was seen as not about anything. And I think that's something that has obviously definitely shifted and taken a long time too. So I think female protagonists on screen make a difference to the films that we're watching. And I also think that the female gaze is a different gaze.
Absolutely. Unjoo, what's your perspective?
I think what's really interesting is that for such a long time, when you go out and try to sell a project or try to get your story on screen, the gatekeepers who make the decisions would always say, well, the primary audience for cinema is the 13 to 24-year-old young boy. And I think I came to realize over time that maybe that was the primary audience at that time, because the films were made by mostly men for that audience. So that's what's available. And I think what's really interesting now is that you can go and see stories that as a woman you relate to a little more, that they're the kind of movies that you might want to see. And I certainly know that for me as a filmmaker, I make the kind of movies that I want to go and see, which is very different from the kind of movies that a generation of male directors may have made. I feel really honored that we're sitting here with Jill, and I don't want to make you blush, Jill. I'm always honored whenever I'm in the room with you, because I think I was really shocked when I first moved to America to discover that between 1930 to 1980, there were only 14 women from the Directors Guild of America who actually had directed a feature film. That's an incredibly long period of time. And so when Jill was exploded onto the scene and then came to America and did Mrs. Soffel, she really broke the ground for so many, many women, not just Australian women, not just Australian filmmakers, but just for women in general. Because I think in the 1980s, suddenly there were more women who were able to take the helm of a story and really nurture it and bring it to life in the screen in a way that I think only a woman can do.
Thank you. That's kind. Yeah. But you're right. When I went to Hollywood, I didn't realize, but I was a freak. I mean, there were no other women directing. I think there was a couple of actresses had got like a gig, and I was invited to talk to Hollywood's Women in Film group, and I was surprised they wanted to meet me. And they said, and I always remember this, they said, "Thank you so much for making a film that looks like a big, expensive film." This is my brilliant career, because the way they see us, they think that women only do low budget, grungy kitchen sink films, like tiny stories that don't look particularly good, because that was actually being touted as the women's style. And actually, it was not the women's style. It was a lack of opportunity for women. So, if the few people who got something up, it was very indie and low budget. The sort of things that I heard then, at one point they said, "Jill, please don't have a female line producer, because they're already worried about you, because they're worried about you being in charge of the budget and the money. And to have another woman, so actually have a line producer who's female, I don't know what they thought. Were we both going to go to like shopping or something with the money?" So my dear producers, who were like so supportive of me, said, "Just to play the game, please, we're going to have to let her go. So because I'll only listen to a man about the money." So yeah, I'm here as a piece of history just to remind everyone how far we've come. I'm sorry, I will be long-winded. I'll just get this all out. So in the beginning, this is for all the young filmmakers to know. When I got out of film school, there were rules like ABC TV would not allow a woman in the editing room, because they felt a female assistant editor working with a man in the dark was a dangerous situation. So there were things that I realized as a young woman, even, someone who was now had opened her eyes to feminism and so on, there were things you just accepted. Oh, okay, so I can't get a job at the ABC in editing. Oh, and I also couldn't get a job in production without having my typing speeds and had to go into the typing pool. So there were no systems to even train women. Everything was geared towards training young men, and all the boys who were at film school with me all got breaks everywhere. So, things really have changed. But and that's just in like 40 years. And all the fuss when I got the gig to do my brilliant career. There would sort of talk behind my back that I would maybe faint because they knew I had to go in the outback. And then my editor had people sticking their head in the door. He told me after we finished the film, saying, "Does it cut together?" Like as if a girl could understand the technical side of film. So there was incredible prejudice. It was, very, very hard for women to get through. So and then everyone was waiting. If that film, My Brilliant Career, had bombed, it would have been, we knew women couldn't do it. So that was an extra pressure. And thank God for other women filmmakers and producers that it did actually do well.
And Jill, I remember you saying that so there was this amazing rush of change, I guess, as women then started to take on more creative projects off the back of My Brilliant Career. But then
a rush, a gentle change.
A gentle change.
Directors like Sam, and then even Jane Campion told me she saw some picture of me in a paper and thought, well, God, if that little girl can do it, I can do it, type thing. So, definitely it helped open the door. And I've got to say, what I realised when I went to Hollywood was Australia was actually much more adventurous, because our funding came from government arts funding compared to Hollywood was business. It was MGM, Paramount, and they were really, really entrenched, big bureaucracies, big old boys networks. So that was why I never would have got the break in America, never, to do My Brilliant Career. So the Australians took the risk. And then if they see that you've done something and it looks good and it was cheaper than their films, they're happy to employ you.
And then it's interesting that over the course of time then, there was that moment around 2014 where a few of you got together and initiated Gender Matters off the back of realising that while there had been a steady climb for a while, then there had been some inertia and we had been going backwards, in fact, in terms of...
Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that Jill and I was at the ADG and we set up a Women in Film and Television Committee, and it was before me too. So Jill, I, Megan Simpson-Hooverman, yeah, we met in a pub and I remember Jill and I talking about how in Sweden they'd done the 50-50 and that what could we do to change the scenario and the landscape. And we talked about going into Screen Australia. So I think Jill went in to Screen Australia, who at the time weren't very interested. But then...
We all went in.
That's right.
The whole group went in.
And they just weren't very interested.
And we met a whole lot of female lower executives, and they all went... We basically said, it's been 40 years since I did Brilliant Career, and actually the percentage of women directing film and TV and writing it in this country is appalling. And I said, I can't believe there haven't been greater changes. And we've done a huge amount of research, and we really put together a really solid proposition with all the research that had been at that time being done around the world, like the British Film Institute, where it actually said, yes, the same number of girls are going to film schools all around the world, but guess what? In the first 5 years, they're not getting a break, they're not getting their foot in their door, whereas the boys are, and the boys' careers are taking off like rockets. So we had a whole plan, we had reasons and how to solve that, and they went, oh, that's too hard. Remember, we all got on the lift, we looked at each other, and we went, they're going to say no. I mean, we were absolutely shocked. We're like, they're going to say no. So really, it was only that I luckily ran into the head of Screen Australia at Toronto at a Screen Australia cocktail party, dragged him outside and had a word and told him some personal stories about young women filmmakers and how, they might have won all these awards, had films in Berlin or whatever, and how they might be answering phones in casting agents, whereas the boys were directed commercial.
And I think also we should give a shout out to Courtney Gibson, because she came to Screen New South Wales and she then implemented the kind of gender parity
immediately, incredible,
which
they need those brave risk takers. And then Screen Australia came on board.
And that was really Fiona Cameron, who was COO at the time, and Deanne Weir, who was on the board. They'd both been very proactive, and they found a way to create the Gender Matters program, which really was so significant in a sense because it flooded the pipelines, and then all of a sudden the kind of normative stance on all funding policies was, does it have enough women on it, and are they key creatives? And I think
we were helped very much by the Me Too movement. So I think that it was one of those things of timing that big companies like Amazon and so on were starting to realize that if they did an initiative that made them look good in how they looked after women, and then the same with the commercial industry in America, the directing commercials, they set up that scheme where they said, well, why can't, if you pitch for a commercial, can't be 1 in 3 be a female director? I forgot what it's called, free the bid, and then free the bid here. But I think at the same time, with suddenly this shame about how women have been treated by big companies, they were all looking at a way to show, oh, well, we're not like that. And so those two things, I think, have really helped. And then guess what? Women made things that made
they were really good,
money, that audiences came to see Unjoo. I was in Hollywood around the time of the 80s when they said to me the same thing. Oh, we don't want to, the only audience are boys. And they only want to see action films and so on. And I thought, well, actually, all the women I know are going to the movies. But they were sort of considered, then there were women weepies, which I didn't want to make. The women will give small amount of money to the women weepies that all women will go and see and weep. The big money will go to those action films. And for me, the most threat, which, women can't direct. and women wouldn't know how to do action. And so actually the fact that we've had, I think it was the first one, now that was the American director that it went through the roof, the first of the big action films. And then, of course, since then, Kate Shortland's done one and Chloe's done one, which I haven't seen yet. But that, for me, was the greatest example that said, because I remember when Philip Noyce got his first action, Philip Noyce and I were both at film school together, and he went off to Hollywood, and I was struggling because we never had enough money on any of my American films. And he'd say, oh, they're giving me more money if I could just put in another explosion and everything. And then he would say, oh, Jill, these action sequences, fantastic. I've got Spielberg's guy and, so-and-so, and they just storyboard it all and so on. And, it's so easy. But I thought, I can do that, but I'm not interested in those stories. But how fantastic, some women have done it. It's made money, and it's said to everyone. I mean, actually, it's gone the other way. They're desperate to find other women to do action movies because one of them made money. They always follow a formula. So, but what we need is we need more films like Chloe's. We do need, yes, we don't want the white man artist. We want diversity and artists of all time, and we want women doing personal stories. Nothing, who cares what they're about, whatever sort of film they as an individual want to make. We need more women up being nominated for Academy Awards. Absolutely.
I think it's so interesting because, Vanessa, you are the product in many ways of Gender Matters. You've been through some of the programs that have kicked off, and here you are in the driver's seat of some cutting edge storytelling that's happening at the moment. I'd be really curious to hear a bit about your perspective about particularly, do you feel like you're able to tell a story that's authentically your own at the moment?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just wanted to, it was really wonderful hearing that sort of origin story of Gender Matters, because I mean, I know Jill and Sammy were, behind it, and you spearheaded it, but just hearing that made me feel a little bit emotional, actually, because I don't know if I wouldn't be where I am now if it hadn't been for that push, because, and you were so ahead of your time. You were before me too, because I remember I graduated from film school where Sam was my mentor, and in that next year, I think it was Gender Matters, and so I had this opportunity it was the Smart for a Girl initiative, so Imogen Banks and Alice Bell's Smart for a Girl initiative through Gender Matters. So they got funding through the program to develop this program for uncredited female writers. And it was basically like, any woman submit an idea, the only criteria is that you haven't got a credit. And so I submitted the idea, the concept, that it's now Echoes, the Netflix show that's now shooting in production. Like,
oh, how great!
Yes, so it's and Imogen's still my producer, and and then Eden, the series I created last year. The reason that I got that job was because my pilot for Echoes, which was called Id before, was the writing sample. So it was this sequence of events. And so I really, when I look back and I think, how did I get, because you feel incredibly lucky. I feel incredibly lucky to be here. And it is because in Australia we had this thing that sort of elevated a film school graduate effectively. And yes, it's taken this amount of time. I mean, I think that was 2015. It's taken a long time to get here, and it hasn't been without its major hurdles and upsets and, crises of confidence and all of the things that you kind of go through to sort of get something made. The fact is, and regardless of that, and I'm definitely, in answer to your question, Hattie, it's not like you suddenly kind of get here as a creator, and it's like, here's your baton and you just are the boss now and you get to make all the decisions, because it's definitely not. What I've learned is that a showrunner is the boss, and they're not going to give you that showrunner job before you've kind of done your time and done your hazing and done your, you know, really proven something. And I do think, I must say that I think as a woman who seems young and is small, and, you know, I think sometimes you are up against it a little more in terms of like having to prove that you deserve to be there and that you can be there. So I definitely feel like I have been I've been trying to get my sort of stripes. But it does feel good now because it feels like the next thing, it feels like it's coming. And so I really just have to thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you've got a really good producer with Imogen looking after you. And do you think, sorry to take over the interview, but I'm like this, have Unjoo and Vanessa, do you think in America now there really is this sense that they sort of actually want to make sure they look out for to find a woman that seems to me completely, I mean, it's Fleabag as well as you know, Chloe and so on, but there is a greater sense that we need a woman. We can't just shoot something without at least one woman, and actually women's stories do well. You know, look at
I think the really clear thing that's emerging right now is that having a female gaze on screen has actually created more of an audience. This is what you and I were talking about earlier, Jill, and it becomes good business for the streamers, especially where, you know, a lot of the streamers do skew more female, and other networks, it becomes good business for them to actually tap into more different markets. It's such a crowded playing field right now in Hollywood with the amount of content that's going on and the amount of streamers that are out there. It's all a new kind of system, especially post-COVID. So I think that where people are trying to get an edge on capturing a certain amount of an audience that can help a subscription base, that is now becoming the new focus. And so I really think, and it's been proven, that having a female gaze on certain stories and a lot of different stories really, and they don't necessarily have to be what has traditionally been seen as women's stories, because I think that women are capable of telling lots of different stories. And even if you have a male protagonist, you do look at it differently as a female director. So you're telling a different kind of story than maybe your male counterpart would have done. But
even like Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog, which is, you know, all about a male protagonist, I think that her gaze, her female gaze, as you say, Unjoo, definitely created a story that was explicitly different to, you know, the way it would have been told if it had had the male gaze upon it.
Yeah, definitely. But I do think that people are recognizing that reaching out to a wider audience is powerful and it's good business right now. So I think that works in favor of having not just women, but more diverse women as well. And more diverse creators and storytellers to tap into other elements of the audience that haven't always been serviced. I mean, I know sometimes I go to the cinema, especially right now, where the mid-range indie movie and the lower range indie movie they are just not on the screen anymore. It's only really, you go to the cinema, it's only really action movies or a Bond film. And while I really admire and really at times enjoy those movies, sometimes I go to the cinema and I don't want to watch that. I don't want to watch all that violence. And so I think that I really do think that the decision makers are really the gatekeepers of the money, and the kind of the people that are running the streamers especially are really seeing the value of tapping into these extra markets that they haven't really tapped into before, especially when it's all about increasing your subscription base.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, the thing, it's always been, I mean, two things that you've said that I think are fantastic. You know what? Well, it's always been about the money. I mean, because it's a business. We forget all these young filmmakers out there who, you know, hopefully you just want to do some piece of art like I did. I had no idea that finally you'd have to make money. And I woke up to that. He said, the second thing, you're right, it's about the gatekeepers. So, I mean, to give you an example, when we, My Brilliant Career, which was like this, famous young feminist novels, incredible breakthrough at its time in the 1890s, which we made and we got funded and everything. When it came near the end, when we actually had to screen it for the distributor, they suddenly got nervous, and they got nervous about the end of the film, that our heroine actually said no. I mean, so there's a romance throughout the story. Those who have never seen it and never will, there's a romance, and I'm now going to spoil it. And at the end, she says no to him, and it's young Samuel, so he's absolutely, completely adorable. But she says, I want my time. I don't want to be just a wife. Well, our distributors suddenly went, oh, we're a bit worried about the ending. We think, and this is from the male distributors, we don't think women are going to like that. We went, what? I mean, like, it's the whole point of the film that she says no to him. Yes, but women like happy endings where the two lovers end up together. Say all these men, to Margaret Fink, the producer, and I. And so we managed to sort of hold them off and say, and head of David Williams, who is the head of Greater Union, he said, let me see it. So he sat and saw our cut, and it was the greatest relief of my life. He turned to me at the ending and said, you were right, that is the right end. But if you think about it, so, I mean, it was a male philosophy about what they think women audiences want. I mean, they are judging how women actually react to story. And of course, the joke was that when that film opened throughout the world, that was the reason it took off, because it was considered so revolutionary, so brave, and we had female film critics particularly who really picked up on it. And that's the other gatekeeper. Don't forget, it's the critics. I mean, for years and years, yeah. I mean, I've always said there's a certain sort of man that became a critic too. They were, sort of lonely little boys who sat in the dark and watched films over and over and had great knowledge of films, and fantasized about beautiful women and on the film. Yeah. And they were a bit weird about those first women's films. I mean, I had film critics that came in to see The Last Days of Shay Nu, which was Helen Guymer's film, where she really wanted to say, women sometimes get it wrong, was the point of view of the film, but all the male critics went in thinking, women have made this and they've written it, so it's going to attack us. And because there's the husband, they never got the point that we're trying to say, which was, and Helen was trying to say, was actually she was somewhat at fault in this relationship. They just took it as those women are making this film to attack us. So, and the one last thing about the Gatekeepers, when we finished Little Women, and we had wonderful the studio, who, by the way, they meted later on, they trudged down to the MGM screening theatre to look at our cut and thought, oh, what a waste of our afternoon, we've got to see this little girl's film. And this was one of the triumphs of my life, when that room full of suits, and those days, the executives all looked like used car salesmen, when they all turned to Nick Bowman and I at the end, sobbing and saying, oh my God, this film is so wonderful. We thought we were just going to see this children's film, and actually this story, like, men should see it, they said. We were like, oh. And they were like, we'll give you more money, we're going to try and get them in. But they said the one thing that goes against it is its title, Little Women. And then later on, when they put us up for Academy Awards, they said, you know what, we really think it deserves so many nominations, but men won't pick up the DVD, they won't watch it, because it's that girls' film, Little Women. So that's a real big change. I was so thrilled that the latest Little Women got nominated, because in the in-between, they've opened up the voting. They've invited more women and greater diversity into the Academy. So if you think about why so few women, I mean, I actually think that Chloe's film, her first feature, should have been nominated. There were some very boring men's films nominated that year. I just thought her talent just was trembling. But it's only now that there's a greater diversity in the judgment and the critique as well, which is...
Yeah, and I think that's only really changed fairly recently.
Yeah.
I even remember, like, you had a film called Little Women, and I made a film called I Am Woman, which didn't go down well sometimes. But I even remember when Rosemary Blight, who produced with me, when she and I were out trying to sell the film, we would sit in rooms of just basically all male decision makers, and lots of people would say to us, at the end of the meeting, we'd enthusiastically, like, I practically act out the whole movie, and then at the end of it, they'd all look at us and say, well, it's a great story, but who's going to want to see a film like about a woman? It was literally as blunt as that. And I really think that if we were going out now, because I think in the last even 5 years,
It's been the last 5 years.
There's been a big change with executives, with different producing companies. I think that the Gatekeepers, the great thing about what's happening right now is not just that there are more women storytellers and creators, but what's really great right now is there are more female decision makers. And even at the lower levels, which is really important because that helps you get to the next stage of the money, of the green light, of wherever you're going to be to get that movie or that television show made. So
do you think of the creative execs? No, I was going to say a lot of the creative execs at Amazon and Netflix and Apple and HBO Max are women now. So when you're pitching projects, whether it's film or television, you're not in rooms or Zooms anymore with all men. There's always women in those rooms.
The sad thing was I was in Hollywood when the first women started to lead studios, but they didn't make women's film. I think they felt so judged that they were now, the first women to be, say, head of Sony or Warner's and so on. They felt they couldn't take the risk. So they continued making the boyo action films. So that's changed. And I do think it was partly with this Me Too thing that made everyone look at how the companies are being run and this sense about diversity as well. I think it's really, who would have thought? But that I think it really has helped change things.
Well, it's interesting too, the changing content landscape. I mean, it's interesting you hear, Sam, that it's the executives of Amazon and Netflix, and we're seeing women in those roles. Do we still feel that those power structures, those gatekeepers, is there more change that still needs to happen within those structures? Sam?
I think we're in a moment of enormous disruption in terms of Hollywood, streamers, the way that now studios have kind of morphed into these big conglomerates where there are the studio, the platforms, and wherever there's disruption, there's opportunity. And they know that the opportunities are with subscriptions, I think, and Disney understand that their subscription base is important, and they know that it moves beyond the US, it moves beyond English language, and now is a really great opportunity for all filmmakers to kind of make their bid for their story, because if they can make it a convincing pitch that there is an audience for it, then there will be good business around it.
But Sam, is it films or is it series for TV?
I think both. I really do. I mean, obviously limited series is in a golden age and more limited than returning because the limited can still attract the kind of high-level cast that streamers are wanting. And I think that high-level cast that are traditionally tied to feature filmmaking are making concessions in that limited series arena, but they're also buying films. Let's not forget that it's not, even if they're streamers, they're still buying films. Jane Campion's is a Netflix film, for example.
Yeah. But what about Australia? It's still only 20% of women directing feature films. What can we do?
I think it's even less. I think it's even less now. I mean, I think there's still a lot of conservatism.
What's happened here?
It's a good question. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, Sam, you've worked in the VR space, and I know you've directed content for online. Like, there are other avenues and platforms that we have access to be able to tell stories. So, I don't know, is it that they're the opportunities that women are finding, female directors are finding?
I think those the different kinds of storytelling is something that we should all embrace. I've got a 16-year-old son, and I often look at the way he looks at content, and he's a great storyteller and filmmaker himself. And I keep thinking, I keep saying to Dion, oh my gosh, we're such dinosaurs. We just want to make a 112-minute film. He's able to tell a story in like 2 minutes. Or sometimes 30 seconds, and then he'll put it up on a platform and get, in 10 minutes he'll get 26,000 views. I mean, the way people are reaching audiences is going to be different, and storytelling is going to change, I think. But I think that as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, I should say, because it's not just film anymore, but as a storyteller, I think that there are so many great resources out there for us right now. And I think also as a young storyteller, if you haven't got the access to the kind of money to make the bigger projects, I would use every avenue, use YouTube, use TikTok, reach an audience. It's amazing the power of that outreach and how that is valued when it comes to making like a longer form project, even for actors.
Make something small and make it wonderful and make it be brand. You don't. Yeah.
I mean, even actors now. I mean, I don't know how you guys have found it, but I certainly found that they will look at the number of followers somebody has on Instagram these days.
Yeah,
that is just
maybe I better write
extraordinary.
Yeah, and even things like if you're looking at underlying IP to make into films, a lot is coming through as TikTok influencers who are also writing articles or books, and then because they bring an audience base with them, then that is part of the consideration of whether you decide to kind of obtain or acquire that underlying IP. So, and I also think it's changing the language of storytelling. That we were talking, Hattie, earlier about TikTok houses now in LA, how young people who are making TikToks in their homes are being brought to LA to live in TikTok houses and being paid sort of large sums of money to keep influencing and to generate enormous amounts of followers.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean,
I know young people who've gone the opposite way. They're literally going back, looking at old movies, watching, and they love documentaries, and so everything comes around and goes around.
Yeah. Something I'd love.
The impact, just to follow up on that, I just think the impact you can have as a storyteller, you shouldn't discount what the avenue is or the medium is to have that impact. I did something with a spoken word artist. It was really simply done, but it's really powerful. It's about gun violence in America. That has been viewed on social media probably like 58 million times.
Wow.
And every time there is, I hate to say, but every time there is something about, gun violence in America, this video comes back up. And at the time, we all donated our services. I saw this great artist. He did this incredible spoken word piece. And I pulled together a whole team, even the equipment houses. We all deemed that it was a really important thing to put out there. We made it for nothing. It looked amazing. We had, one of the best editors in Los Angeles edit it. Everybody just came on board, and it's had, we all really felt that it's had strong impact. Mm-hmm. And that really taught me a lot about the power of social media.
I mean, it's such a powerful piece, Unjoo. It gave me goosebumps. I mean, it's incredible. It's interesting.
How do you find that Unjoo is under your name? Do we look up you?
I'll send it to you, Jill. It's it's called The Wrong Side of History. Yeah, I think it's on YouTube at the moment, but it's called the Wrong Side of History. But I'll send it to you.
Okay.
It is. It's at this point in the conversation, I know that something that's come up in our chats that I'd like to address is the tension that can sometimes be there between female filmmakers also wanting to have a family and taking time out to have children. I know I just love to hear your thoughts on where we're up to in the industry in having a family life as well as a professional life, and whether there are still things in that regard that need to change.
Unjoo, I'll give you my 3 things of that, because I'm the first one of all of you to have children. First of all, you have to find the most wonderful partner who says to you, if we're going to have children, somebody has to be there, and I'll take leave of absence, unpaid leave of absence. So when you're shooting a film, at least one parent is in the home, as well as having a nanny. And the second one that I realised around about the second film was try and be as close as possible to the home and to where I was so lucky in high tide. We shot it in this tiny little village down the south coast. So I had an 18-month-old baby, and I could literally, she could come out and set at lunchtime. I could be home, and in those days you had rushes. I could be home, read her a story, and put her to bed, and rush down to the local hall to see rushes. So that was the other thing about so by the time I did Oscar and Lucinda, I said, the production office, I wanted 15 minutes to be near my home. I mean, I did have the power by then to put my foot down about that sort of thing, because you suddenly realize every minute that you're not with your children, you either should be making the film or else you're with them. And I turned down every invitation to film festivals in some of the most beautiful countries in the world. You know, I could go to Hawaii and Busan and so on, but not when my children were young. I was like, okay, if I'm not making a movie, then I'm at home full time. Anyway, they've turned out all right. They're not in rehab, so if I touch wood.
Your 2 kids have turned out great. You even have a filmmaker now.
I do, yes.
Yes, and I've watched you on set, Jill. We were in the south of France and in England together, and it was amazing.
Shot Charlotte Gray for me.
And it was really inspiring. It was before Dion and I had a child, and it was really inspiring to watch you and to see how you handled it. But I think it's a really big question for women, because it's a really, if that's a choice you make as a woman, we all know how all-consuming filmmaking is. We also know how all-consuming parenting is as well. And not everybody's going to be lucky enough to have a partner who, can be there all the time, who can take time off, especially for me, as my husband and I usually work on movies together. So there's a lot of choices to make as a woman. And the plain fact for women is that there's a biological period of time in which you have children. So you can't just, you've got to factor that in. I mean, I wish somebody had actually explained a little better to me when I was much younger, that there are these plans that you have to kind of think about a little bit, because, if you don't, it could become really a lot trickier and a lot more difficult. And I certainly know that for somebody like me, I took a long period of time offset because because I have 2 filmmakers in my family, and I just could not justify having a really young child that had no parent at home. So and I did take several years away on set.
Years, yeah, didn't you?
Yeah, and I really, but I don't regret that. I actually think that for me, that time away actually made me a better director in some ways, especially when you're around a lot of kids, trying to get them to do what you want them to do without really looking like you're being bossy. It's good practice.
I took the
being a director.
HSC year off, and that was because my oldest daughter actually read an article and said, "Mummy, Peter Weir took the HSC year off for his son." So I put it into it.
Is there a way you think the industry can support you better when you come back after that time away? Sam?
Yeah, the first thing they should never do is ask a woman after she's had a child, what have you been doing all these years?
Yes.
I mean, really? Do you not realize I just had a baby?
Sam, any thoughts you wanted to add?
I think that every experience of having and raising children is different. I know that and that for me, I was a single parent with 2 children, and it definitely slowed me down in terms of directing. But as Unjoo said, I really, in all conscience, couldn't have been directing full time and left my children at home. Like, it was actually something that was really important to me, was to be around them. And then when I did direct things and brought them with me, they loved it and they were kind of completely euphoric. So I think what changes is the rhythm at which you create, and sometimes also the scale at which you create. And as Unjoo says, you know, our CVs look different to men because the rhythm of our making is different. And I think after that period of raising children, then what happens is you have a lot of energy to then go back into your creative life. And it's important that there are open doors for you to do so, for one to do so, and that age then doesn't become a kind of barrier. Again, like in the beginning, if you're a young woman, you need to be taken seriously, but then also as an older woman, it's important to still be considered for.
I think, didn't the Directors Guild try to change the mentorship thing as well, or to introduce one that was also about re-entering the workforce?
We have definitely done mentorships for older women who have had children and been out of the workforce and come back into it. But it's also a perception. It's about shifting perceptions too.
Yeah.
We're getting close towards the end here, and there's just a question that's come through. As a female screen composer, I rely on my network of women and queer filmmakers for work. Have you seen the changing landscape for female directors positively affect the diversity of crew? Vanessa?
I think there are figures on that too. Also, you go.
Oh yeah, Vanessa, do you have any thoughts on the changing landscape for female directors positively impacting the diversity of the crew?
Yeah, I mean, I think the movement is kind of all-encompassing. I think the Me Too movement and the, Gender Matters movement has sort of coincided with, the general diversity push. So I think where there are gatekeepers and people who are making the decisions, who are kind of abreast of all of that, then yeah, I think there is. I think there's always a spectrum, I think. Like any quick change or evolution, I think kind of like technology. Sometimes the technology moves faster than people can kind of keep up with it. So I think there is a lag in some areas, like definitely, and I think that's something for sure that needs to, in my experience, I think that's kind of something we all just need to be hyper aware of.
But there are more women cinematographers finally coming through. I've really noticed them doing that major work, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I know each of you have said this to me in your own way, but, just how important it is as well that there's, that we're all supporting each other in this journey. And that's
no, that is important. I did find in the beginning that actually female producers could be, this isn't like some anti-male thing. When I first started working, I had a lot of women producers who were really tough on me as a young woman director, and I couldn't help thinking, I bet they weren't like that with a young man. So it's also personalities supporting each other. I've had fantastic support from all the male crews and editors I've worked with and so on, and some tough times with women. So we should all be supporting up and coming.
I think we are in a moment which is a wonderful moment to be in which that notion of women competing against each other, which is what I would say a controlling strategy of men, that if we don't think about ourselves as in competition with each other, but as bringing each other up and supporting each other, then that will help the movement and create kind of diversity, kind of lots of inclusion, and that we don't need to be fearful that because one other woman gets something, we might not, but that there is plenty.
And it wasn't just that, it was also prejudice. When we were doing the research about why young women weren't getting commercial, which is really the career path to be, a Garth or whatever and get Lion, we did actually research with some in some production houses, and it was the women, the ones who put the directors up, who said, oh, well, like a woman director couldn't be funny, or a woman director couldn't deal with effects, a woman director couldn't do a car ad. So there's prejudice as well that women sort of growing up in this world, this patriarchal world, also have.
But I honestly think that you couldn't say that even now. Like, the changes have been so great so quickly that you could not say that now and not be.
No, they couldn't say that now, could they?
No.
When we were doing the Gender Matters thing, whatever it was, 6 years ago, they just without even realising that it was terrible prejudice.
I'm going to have to butt in there because we've got a couple of minutes left, and I would love to just quickly go around to everyone and just say, if you had one piece of advice, one little gem to give a young female filmmaker, what would it be? And in and amongst that too, can you also tell me what you're working on? So at the moment, what's next for you? Maybe we'll start with the gem and then we'll go with the what's next for you. So, Sam, do you have a gem for us?
Look, I think you have to back yourself and follow your ambitions and your dreams. And I think you also need to understand we're in a business, so know the business as well as what your passion is, and just to kind of work out how your passion can kind of be facilitated by the business and how you can facilitate business with your passion.
That's great. That's so excellent. Unjoo, what's your gem of advice?
I think I would say to a young director, just really look at what makes you unique, what sets you apart from everybody else. And because there's so much talent out there. There's so many incredible directors out there. And I live in LA, and every day more people graduate, every day more directors come who've won incredible awards in other countries and they move to LA. So just really look at what sets you apart, what makes your storytelling, what makes your work different from everybody else's out there, that makes you the person that should direct that project you really, really are passionate about.
Wonderful. Vanessa, you got a gem?
You know what? It's funny, Sam, because you were my mentor when I was at film school, and you urged me to do exactly what you just sort of said. And I remember you were like, fortune favors the bold. And I wrote it down in my little notebook because I was like, yeah, and I think just I think you have to be resilient in this industry. And you have to, sometimes you have to kind of get into, especially in a writer's room, for example, if you're the creator of a show or something, if you don't kind of fight and if you don't kind of develop that muscle, then you get swallowed. So it's kind of, you actually do have to just back yourself and go, no, I know this story. I know who I am and I know this story. And even though I'm potentially intimidated by this sort of big scale thing that's new to me, I think it's about just knowing that, what you have is something that everyone wants. It's, it's your idea and your deeply held self is that is the precious thing. So just I guess trying to hold on to that as much as possible.
Thanks, Vanessa. I've just been told we've got 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll be really quick. It's hard for me, as you all know. I agree with everyone. Yes, resilience. Yes, find what's unique. Be brave. And yes, hang on to what you've got, which is about trusting your instincts. It's so easy to get battered, but find what you believe in and make something you care about, and don't lose your gut instinct.
Just so wonderful. Thank you, Jill. I'm sorry we don't get to talk about what you're all up to now, but everyone watching, go on, follow these wonderful female filmmakers online and see what they're up to next. Thank you very much to our fabulous panelists. Thank you for taking the time out and sharing your thoughts and vast and varied experiences with us. Thank you to our co-presenting partners, ACMI, Film Victoria and Media Mentors Australia. And to everyone watching, watch out for next Tuesday, the next Meet the Creators, which is Step Away from the Telly Scripted Online. Thank you, everyone. And
Abby.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hattie. Sorry I've gone so much.
Thanks,
It was
Jill.
lovely seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.